Joining us today on The Informed, we've got the full crew talking about the recent leaking of a pretty damning IBAC report. So with us today, we've got John Heron, solicitor, victims advocate, and the federal candidate for the Liberal Democrats in the seat of McEwen. We've got Mario Beeks, author of Blood and Soil, a security consultant and former Croatian military officer. We've got Ryan Smith, the Shadow Minister for Planning in the Victorian Liberal government. We've got Ian Cook, infamous for iCook and the Sludgate saga. And we've also got Caroline Council, one of Australia's leading family law lawyers. Good morning, team.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Michael.
Now, Ryan,
Morning.
the IBAC report, this leaking of the draft report, we don't think there'll be a lot of difference between a draft report and the final report. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think this exposes the culture of the Labor Party, and I think anyone who's been on the wrong side of the Labor Party probably knows that this culture has been pretty entrenched for a long time. The integrity bodies that are part of the Victorian government are obviously, they've said repeatedly that they're underfunded. So I know that the government is trying to stop them from investigating any of the things that have been put towards them. There's some real concerns about how this government runs itself, how it underfunds integrity bodies. And look, I think Ian is best placed to tell us all what his interactions with the government has been like in this regard. But there is certainly a culture of obfuscation, of avoidance, of using public money to make sure that reports and investigations are put on hold or stopped altogether. There's a whole range of different things that this report will expose. Whether or not any action's taken is another thing. We always get very excited in the opposition when these things happen, but the government, and Andrews in particular, appears to have a Teflon coat and nothing seems to go anywhere. It's incredibly frustrating, but it's a damning indictment on this government that they don't seem to have a skerrick of integrity amongst them.
I'd actually put that back on you again though, Ryan. Why can't the opposition land a blow?
Well, we introduced the IBAC when we were in government between 2010 and 2014. We agree that any government in Victoria needs to have an oversight body. But I mean, the government has put so many apparatchiks in senior spots that it just seems to be running defence for itself all the time. And whether it's and if they haven't got their own people in, like I think the Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, is doing an outstanding job, but she complains about a lack of funding. IBAC complains about a lack of funding. We can raise these issues with the media can pursue them, but at the end of the day, if the integrity bodies haven't got the funding and the resources to pursue them, we come up against a brick wall.
I think it's really, I was going to say, I think it's really important, Ryan, that we have these integrity bodies. But to me, it's almost as if we've been to the dentist and we've had our teeth removed. I believe the best sort of integrity bodies are those that are completely independent, that have proper funding. I worked very closely with the then Liberal government in relation to the introduction of IBAC in my capacity as President of the Law Institute of Victoria. We believed at that stage, and still do, in the notion of that independent integrity body. And we've seen the farce that occurs when you don't fund them properly, when you stymie them, when you don't give them real powers. And the powers of investigation, I believe, are one of the essential powers. There's no point having things brought to its attention. They have to be able to investigate, and that requires resources. It's pretty simple.
We've already made an announcement that should we win government in November, that we will take the funding decisions from the government and bring them to an all-parliamentary committee within the parliament. So the Ombudsman, IBAC, other integrity bodies will now make applications to the parliament for debate rather than the current situation. So you make some very good points there. They are not as independent as they should be with regards to funding, and we aim to change that should we win government.
Yeah, with that.
Sorry, Ian, go on.
Okay, with the funding issue, we made a complaint to IBAC 2 years ago. It'd been more than 2 years ago, what we call the original complaint. That entailed a whole bunch of evidence, including video footage, etc. the investigator that was handling that at the time contacted me. We tried to we shortened stuff up for him. We clipped it. Basically, he said to me, "Look, Ian, you've got somewhere between 17 and 20 hours of video camera footage. You've got a whole lot of evidence, etc." He said, "But we don't have the resources to watch this, to go through it, to do it." Now, that was verbally on a telephone conversation, but nice young bloke. He appeared to want to have a look at it. And then shortly after that, we were told it was going to be flicked across to the Ombudsman. And as I say, this is 2 years ago, the Ombudsman's office had a person contact me who said, "Look, there's not much we can do. Even if we do investigate it, and it's a fairly big issue, all we can do is make a recommendation to government." And she was basically saying, "And that'll go nowhere." So they sat on it. Now, as it is, we've refined everything and gone back with other complaints again. And hopefully this time we've been able to short circuit some of it. By the way, also, people like Kel Blair and others have offered to work as investigators pro bono for these organisations to help them, particularly in our matter, where they see as a serious issue of justice and what should be happening. I concur with you about the funding issue. And I think that, yes, you need to fund it, but hopefully yourselves getting back into power can also clean up some of these agencies that have been infiltrated because Daniel Andrews handpicks who he has in particular positions. And that's the problem we have in the Department of Health. You have it in IBAC. These people are Labor sympathisers, if I can put it that way. And that even if I take myself out and say I'm not party political, I don't belong to a political party. I've never put my hat in one particular ring or the other. I'm probably more conservative than the other way. But I look at this and say, take politics out of it. And that's the way IBAC has to be. And that's the same problem in the police. I mean, there is no doing their job without fear or favour. Both organisations should be doing that, but it's not happening at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think as far as the police are concerned, I'm certainly not in a position to criticise the police broadly, but with regards to your issue and the red shirts saga, it's hard to understand why decisions were made not to pursue investigations, if I can be as delicate as I can in that regard. It's very hard to understand that when the government clearly has some issues to answer, why investigations haven't progressed, and I find that curious, to say the least. And with regards to getting change of government and cleaning things up, well, you'd hope that resourcing and funding of these integrity bodies wouldn't be such an issue if there were less reports being made about integrity and corruption concerns.
Absolutely.
I can add to that. I had a lens when I was at Department of Justice about the establishment of IBAC. I'll tell you two stories. Well, first of all, the terms of reference were very, very weak and narrowed it down to public servants, shall we say. I knew straight away the backlog was about 2 years of people submitting cases. I want to just tell you two examples. A friend of mine came when they were setting up the security contract for IBAC, and the contractor that was setting it up went around to service providers and said, "I'll put you on the tender if you give me 30 grand. All right. So that's how it kicked off. Right. And my boss called the guy in. I had a chat with my boss, and the guy wanted to pay out, and he just said, "Look, get out or I'll get the police on you." Right. So that's how it kicked off. The first person to appear before IBAC was a guy called Barry Wells. Now, he did work alongside me in Department of Transport, where he took kickbacks and ran tenders under his own companies, et cetera, et cetera. Why do they choose him? Is because he was an absolute soft target in doing so. So it's all smoke. And I, without going into it further, I saw some extraordinary things of people going to ad nauseum lengths to tout that as a great success story. I sat in a meeting once with the Victorian government solicitor, and there was a girl that sat next to me, a 20-year-old girl called, well, won't name her, and they were defending her in IBAC. And I sat in these meetings with them, and they were speculating on the reasons why she was investigated, etc. It was an absolute fast. It's incredible. That's, if you want to see how it's done, I've seen it. And if that's how it operates now, there is no hope of Andrews ever receiving a blow.
So if I may add something on this, you know, I'm not in Victoria, and I can see that you talk with a big knowledge and expertise. But who has benefits that IBAC doesn't work properly? Somebody must benefit from this one. I think that's the cause we should look into this. Who is watching the watchers? And I don't think so that any type of crime, even in the case of the Ian Cook, you know, the saga, it should be, you know, put on a standby and, you know, never been solved. I truly believe that somebody benefiting of this IBAC not working properly, number one, and secondly, everything could and should be investigated regardless of the time frame or the timeline, anything being happened in the government or around the government. So that's my view.
You got to ask, when Adam Somyurek was subjected to 2 or 3 days of public hearings when Andrews was brought in on the same issue, they weren't public hearings. Why the difference? I mean, at the very least, IBAC needs to explain why one protagonist was interviewed publicly, the other not.
Because they have more interest in your image.
Interesting.
We've seen both sides of the major parties come unstuck. We've seen Gladys. We've seen you know, bottles of wine bring people undone. We've even seen Barnaby Joyce come out and say that an ICAC, a federal ICAC, would make politicians scared to do their jobs. Like, I honestly thought it would have been, he didn't finish the sentence. It should have been, it would have been frightening for politicians to do their job corruptly. So, you know, this has become a little bit in Victoria. We've just had the Attorney General come out and say, Andrews spent $13 million on political advertising of our money, of taxpayers' money, and Andrews' response was, so what? Gladys Berejiklian, when she was confronted about pork barrelling, it happens, get over it.
Go on, sorry.
Do we
it's worse than that. From when you get someone like Andrews comes out and he says that's an opinion, it's the Auditor General, for God's sake. It's not an opinion, that's his job. His job is to say, this is what happened. That's like saying to a lawyer that, you know, legal opinion, all right, so legal opinion might be able to be argued. Andrews is saying it is just an opinion. And that's where this Teflon comes from in this guy, because he is quintessentially able to stand in front of a camera and lie without flinching. The man is dangerous. Anyone that can do that is seriously dangerous.
And I think, Ian, we've seen this whole new chapter in politics post-Trump, who literally just said, it's okay to lie, you can lie, you should lie whenever you could. So I think this is playing through. They're just, the boldness with which this is occurring now on the political stage is, I think, terrifying. And that is exactly when you need integrity commissions to work.
I agree 100% with you. And IBAC was set up, as you said, to do all of that. You know, if I hark back to what Mr. Smith was saying before, you've got a situation where we had a senior sergeant of police at Dandenong CIU, Sergeant Ash Penry. So he's one of the most senior operating detectives in that CIU. He writes a briefing paper, says there's a prima facie case, here's a list of suspects, here's what needs to happen, and it goes nowhere. Where is IBAC? I mean, that's a lay down misere for them. And on top of that, we know that Penry was pulled in by IBAC to discuss his investigations, the covert ones he did before the hierarchy found out that he had been put on our complaint.
And there's no question that fraudulent, in the red shirt saga, that fraudulent timesheets were submitted to be paid by the public purse. No one's ever argued that those timesheets were filled out incorrectly. That's just fraud. I've got, as some of you know, there's former police who sit now as my colleagues who will tell me that they are clearly fraudulent. There's no argument about it. And even the Labor Party doesn't say, oh no, we didn't fill them out. They say we filled them out because we thought it would be okay. But there's fraudulent timesheets with ministers' signatures.
Yes, but that's it. But that's where the fudging comes. This is where the opinion comes. It's the language of spin that says, okay, well, that was fraudulent. What we've got to do now is make it a mistake, or what we've got to do is make it something else. And you can't. You produced a false and misleading document. That's fraud. That's indictable. That should be investigated, and not just investigated by IBAC. That should have been a police investigation. However, internal police people that talk to us and to our supporters clearly say that there are some very disgruntled members of the fraud squad who were involved with what you're discussing, and they were ready to go in and arrest people. Now, arresting always sounds bad, but arresting just means there's prima facie allegation against you. You're brought in under arrest and given an opportunity to put your side of the story. If your side of the story doesn't stack up, then they charge you. If it does stack up, they let you go. But no one was arrested.
Crazy.
I realise Trump and Andrews, opposite sides of the political spectrum, but are they as one with Trump with his, I could shoot someone on 5th Avenue and get away with it. Has Andrews become that enamoured with his own importance, or that supported by people who through the division that we're currently seeing at the moment with politics, where they just don't want him held to account, where, as Ian said, it's all very well for these organisations, IBAC or Attorney General, to make findings and recommendations, but in the end, it has to come down to the police to investigate, or to take it from there. Do we have confidence in the police, as he says, for the apparatchiks? What next? How do we fix this?
No,
Look, Michael, I raised the whole Trump analysis, and they are the same beast. They're different colours, different shades, if you will. And I know people may think that's a bit of a stretch, but once you're in office and you have that power, and that power is corrupting, and you are prepared to lie, then you are the same beast. And I'll leave it to the others to talk about policing this.
But that's
I agree with you. Yeah. Sorry.
As everyone said, the number one thing is the cronyism. Andrews is very confident that he's stacked all of these agencies and down to quite lower middle management with cronies. Now, you may not be aware, in November 2018, a month later, Andrews absolutely cleaned up the public service by putting in his hitman, Chris Eccles, who put all the department secretaries were, I'll pick the Department of Justice secretary. So she was worked for him, and also her background was as a political advisor to a Labor member. Now she runs the whole Justice Department, but that was expanded out everywhere. So of course, come pandemic, different type thing, they were caught out, they're way out of their depth. But the important thing is, Andrews relies on these people. If they stuff up, they have a parachute out. So many of these people, I'll give you an example. Peake and the Secretary of DHS gets out, $500,000 job. It is equivalent to something like Mexico and how the PRI operates there from top to bottom. So no one, if you back Andrews, he'll back you and you'll get out unscathed. That's how it operates.
She's got a senior position with the Western Australian Labor government now.
That's right. Yeah. So everybody knows. The only ones that arc up, Somyurek and the other the other woman.
Yeah.
So the only reason they in my view, kick back, and Ian and I know that other woman grilled us at inquiries, but they didn't get pre-selection and didn't get a job. That's the only reason they arced up. Let's be frank. Everybody else is got an implied hand in pocket, a parachute to get out. That's how Andrews operates, and he knows that, and he knows he'll never get touched.
We've just seen Jerome Weinmar put up for a $500,000 job, and the outcry seemed to bring that back.
A disaster of Vic Roads, and you fail upwards.
Yeah.
You can, Michael. You can't.
Sorry.
When you're discussing Trump versus what's his name, Andrews, but both of them stopped being about the side of politics that they were on they've both met in the centre. If you think of it like a pendulum, they're sitting in the centre of power. They don't care. Do you think Andrews wakes up in the morning and says, how can I help the vulnerable? No, he doesn't. How can I help employ more people? Not a care in the world. 400,000 plus a year. Thank you very much. I just want to stay in power. And given the things he's done, he's suffering the dictator's curse. And that is that if I lose power and there's an investigation, oh dear, I could go to jail. So he has a very powerful motive to continue the modus operandi that he has started. He really has to do it. And there has to be political will from the opposition and independents that are truly independent to come in and say, we are going to hold people to account who got paid off, who did the wrong thing.
I have to say I am committed, and I have said many times in my party room that should we win, there will be a very, very solid investigation into where money's gone, where grants have gone, where tenders have been awarded. We can't, I mean, New South Wales Liberals did a great job at exposing New South Wales Labor and has kept Labor out of office for 10 years because people have got a very clear idea that New South Wales Labor are corrupt, with people actually going to jail. We can't for a moment let these guys get away with what they've done. And I'll tell you guys, and I've said it publicly before, we're going to look very hard at what these guys have done because they need to be held to account.
Good work, Ryan.
Yeah.
Good work.
A lot of stuff gets hidden as well, or doesn't get reported. My older brother is a bit of a forensic accountant for us. He is accountant by profession and does lots of system stuff. We know that the Department of Health gave community chefs. So when Andrews and his boys were buying the embarrassment back for $1 a share, so a business that cost over $30 million to set up, the state government bought it back off the shareholders for $17. And all sorts of reasons why they did it and blah, blah, blah. However, what they don't tell you is right then, right at the death knell, when this company's being wound up and put into the Department of Health, they gave it $3 million in cash. Where did that go?
Well, Ian, I agree with you what you say even before, but if I may, doesn't matter Daniel Andrews is on the power or not on the power. There are always going to be people like Ryan and other generations, because information has a trace, has a source. And whatever they try to hide now, it's going to come out in 5-10 years' time. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you from my experience, it doesn't matter how long communism was living. Once when things are changed, information starts flowing out. Same is going to be with Daniel Andrews. He can't kill the successor because he doesn't know who it is. That's number one. And secondly, everything what's happening right now, there is a lot of people there who are not only power, but serving the power, who's going to come out and going to say what was happening then. I know it's a longer time, but I say again, thank you, for the pointing this out.
It's almost circa Joe Bielke Peterson in Queensland back in the old days with Russ Hinds and his cronies going on. There just needs to be some accountability, or at least a genuine attempt to investigate. If it was the only way to remove this stench, this suspicion, this stigma, is to hand it over. As a leader, it should be investigate it, let it run its course, hands off, and at the end of it, line under it, let's move on. And until that's done, it's always going to be suspicion, and it does great harm.
It does. And you can say what you want about these people, but the day that Gladys Berejiklian was under investigation by IBAC, she resigned from the position of Premier. The day that Barry O'Farrell was shown not to have been declared something, he resigned as Premier. Andrews is the subject of a report that says there's entrenched corruption and misuse of public funds, and he just stays there and says it's someone's opinion. I mean, the stark differences, with notwithstanding what Barry and Gladys may or may not have done, they responded in a way that public would expect them to respond. Andrews has never been held accountable for anything he's done, so why should he leave? In fact, he got an increased majority at the last election.
He has absolutely no regard for the Westminster system. The others that you described do. And when you have someone who has absolutely no respect for the democracy and the way that democracy is meant to operate, once again puts you back in the category of having a dangerous person in charge, because none of the normal rules of civil society then apply as they see it to him, or he sees it to himself. He's above the law, and that has to be stopped.
Yeah, that's
no respect for the position of Premier, no respect for democracy, no respect for the Westminster system. I agree entirely. And gee, again, who does that remind us of?
Yeah,
Trump.
exactly.
No respect for the office of the presidency. It's the exact same thing.
It's beyond Yorkie Peterson, but as we said on other programs,
I agree.
The Westminster system in Victoria is flatline, right? Particularly the merging of the Andrews regime politically with the executive is just, they're just one and the same. I'm not allowed to again comment on the judiciary. I think they're holding out there. But one of the things I'll just caution Mario when he said there's a trail. You need to know that the executives have been very well trained on the group thing, where nothing's put down in writing. Everything is verbal. As Ian pointed out earlier, they know that now. This is back like Eastern Europe in the 80s and 90s. So they've learnt those lessons. If you try and get an FOI out of the government, good luck. Ryan knows that. Suppression orders in court, you name it. This is a full-on Eastern European regime operating in full view of the public.
Well, we saw that during the hotel quarantine inquiry, where nothing was able to be concrete was able to be put in front of anyone.
Yeah,
I do agree with you, John. But as sorry, Michael.
Sorry, Murray. We've seen the length and the money, our taxpayer money again, that the Andrews government spends on fighting freedom of information requests as well. So, in the whole Coates inquiry, can't recall, not sure who it was. That's like the captain of the ship runs into the dock. I've got no idea who was driving, but I'm confident I should remain the captain of the ship. Like, really?
Yeah. When your argument is you'd rather the public think of you as ignorant than responsible, well, that's a pretty ugly situation to be in.
Great way to finish,
Yes.
Ryan. And so we've got to wind it up there. Hopefully, we've got the firefighters now kicking up a stink. They're also part of an IBAC investigation. They seem to have thrown their toys out of the cot with the Andrews government. So who knows if that'll lead to anything. But until we meet again next week, team, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye all.
Right.